Very good evening to all of you. Today is a very special day for us, for IDSK family, Institute of Development Studies, Kolkata. We are going to celebrate Foundation Day today, and the Foundation Day lecture will be delivered by Professor Amartya Sen. This session will be presided over by Professor Bagchi, the founding director of Institute of Development Studies, Kolkata. May I request Professor Bagchi to come to the stage. First, we are going to felicitate Professor Sen with a bouquet of flowers. Our student, Priyanka Rajgupta, is going to present. We are now going to felicitate Professor Bagchi with a bouquet of flowers. Our student, Mona Lisa, is going to present. Ladies and gentlemen, we need a few words before the proceedings start today. Few words about Institute of Development Studies, Kolkata. All of you probably know that the Institute of Development Studies, Kolkata was set up in 2002. It's an autonomous research institute entirely supported by the government of West Bengal. So this is the 17th year of our existence. Our focus is mainly on research, development research, and the government of West Bengal has declared this institution as a center of excellence in social science research. The Indian Council of Social Science Research has recognized the Institute of Development Studies, Kolkata, as a special category institute a couple of years ago. Our founding director, Professor Bagchi, is here. And he was the key person behind setting up this institute. And we have had long association with Professor Amartya Sen. He visited our institute several times when we are on Alipur campus earlier. He visited us. And even after that, when we moved to our Salt Lake campus, again he visited us. We have close association with the kind of research that Amartya Sen, Professor Amartya Sen, wants to see through his institute, Pratichi Institute, a research institute which is basically funded by Pratichi Trust, which he set up with his Nobel money. We have long association with Pratichi Institute as well. We closely work together, and for that we are ever so grateful to Professor Amartya Sen for giving us this opportunity to work together. He's our inspiration, along with Professor Bagchi. Both of them, in fact, so far have given us the inspiration to keep up our work. I thank Professor Sen for having agreed to our request to present the Foundation Day lecture today. And I thank all of you who have come all the way to be here with us to celebrate our Foundation Day lecture. With these few words, Let me now request Professor Bagchi to preside over the function. Over to Professor Bagchi. Now, Professor Bagchi will felicitate Professor Sen with a shawl.
Good evening, friends. This is the 18th birthday of the Institute of Development Studies, Kolkata. And we are very happy that Professor Amartya Sen has agreed to give the foundation lecture today. This is not the first time that we have had the pleasure of having Professor Sen in the IDSK. He in fact inaugurated our Rabindranath Tagore Center for Human Development Studies. Professor Chakraborty has already said some things about Professor Sen. I don't have the temerity to say anything more about him. I'll only add that I have had two dadas in my life who have had as much to do with my learning as my teachers. One is Professor Sen, and the other is Professor Sen's classmate and close friend, Professor Sukumar Chakraborty. I have known Professor Sen since and it is my great good fortune that we have remained friends from that time until today. Without any further ado, I would request Professor Sen to give his talk. And I may add that Professor Sen has agreed to take some questions, but the questions should be put at the end of the lecture in the form of written notes, and Professor Sen will select those which he wants to reply to. May I now request Professor Sen to give his talk?
Thanks. Okay, good. And if I become inaudible, please stop me by putting two arms up and indicating that you have something to say. The title of my talk is on being a Bengali, and some of my relations express surprise at that, because for a very long time I've very much expressed reluctance about counting people by their provincial origin. And in fact, in Santiniketan, where I studied, it's quite a big thing. And the distinction between Bengali and non-Bengali, as ugly a word as one I can think of, was a big one. And I had to express my total reluctance to use that categorization. But be that as it is, that's the subject today. For many people from Bengal, the identity of being a Bengali is evidently important. But what is so special about being a Bengali? And if there's some specialness there, in what way and for what reason may it command our attention? Perhaps even our loyalty. These are not easy questions to address, but before I try to have a go in tackling them, tackling these difficult issues, I should say a few words on the idea of identity itself. That a sense of community or of fellow feeling can be important for us, for us all is difficult to dispute. And this perception of closeness may relate to the understanding of our own social identity. Looking outward, that is, at other people, we may be able to classify other people to a considerable extent by their background and their community affiliation. And the reading of identity has relevance in our understanding of how we might expect a particular person or a group of people to behave. The importance of social identity would be hard to ignore in the way human beings can be categorized and described. And yet we have reason to entertain very considerable skepticism about the significance of any identity which we take to be ours, or looking outward, decide to attribute to others. Identity can be such a captivating idea that we can end up giving it much more territory than makes sense, or than what can be justified through critical scrutiny. One problem is the coexistence of multiple identities which we all have. I'll try to write about that in a book called Identity and Violence, published, I guess, about 10 years ago. Each of us belongs to many different groups and can be seen as having many identities. There are several different procedures of partitioning people. A person can simultaneously have the identity of being, say, a farmer, a farrier, a woman, a feminist, a vegetarian, a novelist, a physicist, a jazz fan, and a resident of Calcutta, without any of the identities contradicting anything else stated in the other identities. Depending on the context, any of these various identities may have some special descriptive or prescriptive relevance. If, for example, the person gets involved in the promotion of classical jazz in the world, her identity as a jazz lover may be more relevant than her identity as a resident of Calcutta, which, that is, being resident of Calcutta, on the other hand, may be more crucial when she makes a criticism of the way public transport in Calcutta is organized. There is scope for choice in determining which of the various identities of a person can be seen to be relatively more important in a particular context. The choice can also be more involved in the placing of oneself in the society at large. In Rabindranath Tagore's novel Gora, the brilliant but problematic hero, also called Gora, who championed Hindu customs and tradition and is a staunch traditionalist conservative, is placed in some confusion when his supposed mother tells him that she is not her mother and that he was adopted as an infant by this Indian family after his Irish parents had been killed by the mutineers in 1857, in the mutiny of 1857. Gora knew none of that as a child and grew up as an Indian. Despite his fair looks, because he was Irish parentage, Gora can mean fair or white, but he chose to identify particularly with Hindu conservatives and became a powerful exponent of the traditionalist point of view. we do discover many things about ourselves, even when they may not be as foundational as the one that Goa had to ask about himself, to wit, what importance to give to the traditional identity with which he had hitherto chosen to grow up, compared with other competing identities of real nationality, of class, and of course his Irish origin. Goa had to decide whether he should continue his championing of Hindu conservatism despite being of foreign origin, and being a foreign origin is a fact that will tend to exclude him from many traditional Hindu temples altogether, or whether he should see himself in some very different way. Goa, by the way, is, I believe, one of Rabindranath's great novels. The choice that emerges with conversation with Goa's girlfriend was very important in this, and also their family. In that, Goa decides to see himself as just as an Indian, without a caste or a sect. And is a result of, and this choice is a result of his reflected decision. Choices have to be made even when discoveries occur. So any perceived identity, including that of being a Bengali, need not close people's options at all and lock the person up with some unique bundle of specific characteristics. That possibility has to be considered, but we need not have any automatic priority. Depending on the nature of our inquiry, the ascertaining of a person's cultural identity can help to throw light on the kind of question that may get immediate attention in the evaluation. The different cultural traditions in the world have evolved in many different ways, and the impact of these histories, those features of the past, can make a difference, at least a suggestive difference in many situations. The fact that there is no closing of inquiry with a firm cultural diagnosis, person being a Tamil or a Bengali or a Gujarati, no locking up of his abilities with one elementary identification, does not remove the relevance of what the chosen cultural identity may suggest to us. It may have a great suggestive value. The fact that being a Bengali can be very important is relevant, but not necessarily compelling. And this recognition may come at the beginning rather than at the end of an investigation about oneself, or for that matter about someone else. Can we consider, perhaps even roughly, some elements of the pool of particularities that being a Bengali may entail? I'm going to list a few things here, but none of these is powerful enough to drown the relevance of all other possible attributions that can be made to this person. But even though historically linked characteristics may not be in any way decisively consequential, each of them may be useful to consider and contemplate when trying to focus on the general identification of a person being a Bengali. So what makes Bengalis different to the extent they are different is the question we have to ask. Well, beginning with long history, when Buddhism disappeared from India, after nearly 1,000 years of being dominant in the country, a fact that is distressingly forgotten today when people talk about ancient India as Hindu India. For 1,000 years, it was Buddhist India. It continued, Buddhism did, to remain powerful and influential in Bengal for some more centuries. The Buddhist Pala kings ruled over Bengal for 4 centuries, and when ultimately were subdued in the 12th century, this was quite close to the Muslim rulers taking control of Bengal in the 13th century. One ends in 12th and the other begins in the 13th. In between comes a very brief interlude of Hindu kingdom, as it happened. The Sena dynasty, I should explain, no relation of mine, and they were dominant but couldn't be long, because by the time they raised their head to a Buddhist society, they were quite close to the arrival of Muslims in Bengal. Many features of Bengali culture, including the all-important Bengali language, emerged in the ending days of Buddhist Bengal and were nurtured in the transition years. The importance of Buddhist influence on Bengali culture is very unlike, indeed generally much stronger than what it is in the rest of India. This can be observed in Bengal's history of beliefs, language, literature, arts, and architecture. If I had time, I could have elaborated on them, but they're very extensive in a way that we don't see from that period in the rest of India. Second, the shipping routes to and from Bengal were well established for a very long time. Even the early Chinese visitor, Faxian, as he is sometimes put in the New Pinyin, but Faxian, as we were taught in school, who had come to India in 401 AD by the northern land route from China. He took 2 years to reach India, coming by Kolkata and Afghanistan. But he, Faxian, returned to Bengal after his 10 years in India, sailing from Tamaulipas or Tamluk, which is quite near our Kolkata today. And he went first from Bengal to Sri Lanka, then to Java, then finally got home to China. The trading connections with all these regions were well established in those ancient days. The mouth of the Ganges near today's Kolkata was the point of export of many products of Bengal, particularly cotton textile, which were well known in the world, including Europe, but also commodities obtained further north, like saltpeter from Patna, which were sent down the Ganges to be shipped out from Bengal. The lucrative trade and commerce of the region was, of course, the reason why the trading firms originally came to this area. This included the East India Company, which would go on before long to establish what would become Britain's Indian Empire. But the English were not alone in seeking trade with Bengal. There were also the French, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Danish, and other European trading companies in the same region, which were all operating in Bengal at that time. Trade with East Bengal was more difficult in the early years because of navigational complexities, indeed difficulties. There is some evidence that the trading prospects radically widened as the original flow of the Ganges through Hooghly, going past what is now Kolkata, got harder because of silting. And this flow of water, and the flow of water going eastward, coming down from UP and further north into what is now Bangladesh, then increased over time. Richard Eaton has described well this shift in the flow of water, and I quote from Eaton, due to continual sedimentation, however, the Ganges in very early time began to spill out of its former river bed and find new channels to the east. The Bhairab, the Matabhanga, the Gorai, Madhumati, the Aryan Khan, until finally in the late 16th century it linked up with Padma or Padma, enabling its main course to flow directly into the heart of East Bengal. This change had the immediate effect of linking up the economy of East Bengal to subcontinental as well as global markets, and led to a rapid expansion of economic activities in the East, reflected also in the fast-rising revenue collection, and was really fast, from the eastern side of Bengal, even for the Mughal treasury. The energy of newly arriving Muslims coming into the region, working for economic expansion, is hugely celebrated by the leading Hindu poet Mukundaram in his Chandi Mongol at the end of the 16th century. Mukundaram went on to note that these economic activities of the Muslims coming in from the north, apart from yielding the usual benefit of dynamic migration, had even driven out the dreaded tigers from the region. I quote from Chandi Mongol, translated by Richard Eaton. From the west came Zafar Mian, together with 20,000 men, Suleiman beads in their hands. They chanted the names of their peers and their prophet, and having cleared the forest, they established markets. I didn't know this fact, but extraordinary connection of the arrival of Muslims and the emergence of markets in East Bengal. And hundreds of foreigners ate and entered the forest. And hearing the sound of their axe, the roaring tiger ran away in fear, unquote. This is kind of Hindu phrase of Muslim dynamism in 500-600 years ago. Industrial enterprises, including textiles, involving high levels of specialized skill, such as the famous muslin of Dhaka, grew rapidly. Adam Smith describes Bengal as one of the most prosperous regions in the world. And in this prosperity, the Hindus and the Muslims had a cooperative role. Third, there's something very special about the Bengali calendar called the sun. It's such a special story that I'm so surprised that very few people seem to talk about this or know about this. It is the only extant calendar, only surviving calendar, in which the influence of Emperor Akbar's abortive attempt at establishing an all-Indian multi-religious calendar, the Tariq-Ilahi, survives. At the end of the first millennia in the lunar Muslim calendar, the Hijri, approached in the late 16th century, like the last decade of the 16th century, Akbar wanted a multicultural calendar to replace all the existing ones for India that would be solar, like the Hindu calendar, combined with features of the Muslim Hijri calendar also. This is one of his integrative attempts at building a multicultural India. The 0 year was fixed at 1556 AD, the year, as it happened, of Akbar's ascendance to the throne, which corresponded to 1478 in Hindu Shaka calendar and 963 in the Muslim Hijri calendar. Despite Akbar's lofty and visionary hopes, the Tariq-e-Ilahi never caught on in Delhi or Agra, despite its use in Akbar's own court, which would stop after he died. But it had influence in Akbar's recently acquired province in his empire, namely Bengal, through amending the traditional Bengali calendar. The new Bengali sun, Sean as we often call it, got renumbered at the 0 year of Akbar's Tariq-e-Ilahi, putting the clock back from the year 1478 in the Shaka calendar, as it was then in Bengal, to the Hijri 963, that it lost a number of years. However, it remains solar, as in the earlier Hindu calendar, both the Vikram and the Shaka. So in the years since that time, the slow-moving Bengali shone, as slow as the Hindu Shaka calendar and the Christian Gregorian calendar, had moved far less forward than the Muslim, much faster moving lunar Hijri calendar, with its shorter year of not 365 days, but 354 days, 8 hours and 45 minutes in solar reckoning. So over the years, over the century, it mounted, it brought about a big change between the Hijri sun and the Bengali sun. So what does this year? It is 1426 in Bengali sun right now, as we talk here today in this IDSK meeting. What does this 1426 tell us? The answer is that it commemorates Prophet Muhammad's move from Makkah to Medina, the origin of the Hijri calendar, in a mixed lunar-solar system of counting. Muslim lunar until 963 and Hindu solar since then, but moving more slowly than Hijri. A religious Hindu may or may not be aware of this connection with the Prophet of Islam when he or she invokes this date in a Hindu ceremony. The Bengali sun is very important for many Hindu functions, but this is inescapable given the integrated nature of Bengali tradition going back many centuries. Fourth, the Bengali language has some special features, unlike most Indian languages. And to the development of these features, Muslims and Hindus both seem to have contributed substantially. Dinesh Chandra Sen discusses these multi-religious influences in early Bengali very well. A striking specialness relates to the non-use of gender in Bengali. The absence of male-female distinction, particularly in the form of the verbs. In the emerging days of the newly born Bengali language, it lost the traditional feature of gender division, which was so very important in Sanskrit. The male and the female verbs, and often nouns as well, seem to have the same structural form in the emerging Bengali language, no distinction between male and female, rather similar in this respect to the linguistic features of the Turkish language, which also has exactly the same feature. The dropping of gender, departing rather sharply from Sanskrit, is seen in the evolution of the eastern branch of Prakrit, the Magadhi Prakrit, in taking the momentous step of dispensing with genderized articulation, including doing away with the distinction between male and female forms of verbs. A similar transformation was happening in Oriya and Assamese as well, which also derived from Magadhi Prakrit. The genderlessness of early Bengali classics was widely noted in that rapidly growing literature authored both by Hindus and Muslim writers. I should add here that when the Hindus and the Muslims cooperated in this linguistic evolution, so did many of the Adivasi languages. Many of them did not have any gender, and sometimes we overlook the contribution that the Adivasi languages made to the primary big influences of the Hindus and the Muslims in providing a jointly constructed Bengali language. And they all some genderized language. And this happened preceding or while during the emergence of early Bengali. So there is a long history of intercommunal cooperation in Bengal, which was more than just mutual tolerance. Sanskrit was my favorite language, favorite subject along with mathematics. But this was all because I was going with my grandfather, Amartya Sen. He was very concerned about Sanskrit, but he was also very concerned about the relation between Hindus and Muslims. And he was, of course, one of the pioneers on research in Kabir and Dadu and the others, and about which view on the Hindu and Muslim sources who interacted with each other. Amartya Sen, who wrote the very successful book on Hinduism for Penguin Books, I believe that has sold more, that is a larger sale of an English book on just called Hinduism. This was done in the 50s and is still in print today. At that time there were 5 books that Penguin published for different religions. The only one to survive is this Hinduism. But the last few chapters are entirely full of how the Islamic influence changed the nature of Hinduism of that period. Now he used to repeatedly make the important cultural point, I heard from him many times, that the real issue in the good relation between Hindus and Muslims is not mutual tolerance, but cooperative joint work. He was like everyone in the family, aside from admiring Rabindranath, who was also a great devotee of Mahatma Gandhi, but thought that there wasn't enough about joint work as opposed to tolerance in Gandhi's understanding of Hindu-Muslim amity. In his heavily researched book called Hindu Musalmane Yukta Sadhana, Kittiman forcefully argued how much more important joint work was compared with mere tolerance. It's quite a long history of close collaboration that we find in dealing with Hindu-Muslim relations in Bengal, and he used to tell me how you cannot understand the language, the literature, the architecture, and the art without looking at joint work as opposed to tolerance. It is in fact important to recollect how integrated the Muslim courts in Bengal were in including Hindus. It is not only that the translation of the Sanskrit epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, into Bengali was commissioned by Muslim kings of Bengal. This seems to have begun in the 14th century, and these early Bengali translations are still among the most read versions of these ancient epics. These are moving accounts, there are moving accounts how one of those Muslim kings wanted to hear those old Sanskrit epic stories again and again every evening. The Muslim kings were not, of course, abandoning their own Islamic beliefs in any way whatever. They remained fully Muslim. But they were also establishing non-religious affiliation in addition to their own religiosity, showing 700 years ago that a person's religious identity need not overwhelm every other aspect of a person's life and attachment. That largely secular understanding seems to have been well seized by the Muslim kings who ruled Bengal with very few exceptions, all the way until the British conquered Bengal. This extended even to the last independent ruler of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, who was defeated in the Battle of Plassey in 1757 by Robert Clive's British forces. When Clive was marching towards Plassey, or Palashi as we call it, and still pretending to be seeking peace with Siraj, it was a pure pretension, and this deception was of course a part of Clive's cunning and not particularly candid strategy, which actually worked, because this gave us a complete surprise about how prepared Clive was in defeating Siraj. On the way he wrote to Siraj, Clive did, proposing that their disputes could be solved and they could be placed for arbitration by people whom the young Nawab, as Clive put it, trusted, your circle. And who were these members of the circle? Clive mentioned you can consult Jagat Seth, Raj Mohan Lal, Mir Jafar, Rai Dullah, Mir Madan, and the rest of your great men, unquote. This is a list of 1 Muslim and 4 Hindus in what Clive identified as the inner circle of the last independent Muslim king of Bengal. There is thus a long history of Hindu-Muslim cooperation in Bengal's past. And yet the sad fact is that this history did not succeed in preventing communal violence when hostile division between the two communities were powerfully promoted in the pre-independence political atmosphere in undivided Bengal, about to be divided Bengal. Violence did come plentifully in the 1940s, just preceding the partition of India. There was resistance to this. Even in the elections of 1937, just before that, the secular parties won largely, handsomely in Bengal. But the pushing of communal poison through the early years of the 1940s broke the resistance down. The first election in which Muslim League won was as late as 1946, immediately preceding the partition. But then by 1952, in East Pakistan, which would later become Bangladesh, in 1942, East Pakistan was already getting increasingly committed to focus primarily on language rather than religion. Bhasha Andolan shifted the attention back to the commonality of Bengali identity rather than the separatism of religious identification. But in the period in between the end of the 30s and 52, that period, hundreds of thousands of Hindus and Muslims have lost their lives in senseless communal violence. There was nothing extraordinarily peculiar about not distinguishing between Hindus and Muslims until the poison was unleashed. Not unleashed only by the Muslim League, I might say, because Hindu communitarianism was extremely strong as well. Rabindranath put the principal diagnosis of a coexistence in very clear terms in his Hibbert lectures at Oxford in the early 1930s, when Rabindranath stated with some evident pride that who is he? He said, I come from, I quote, a confluence of three cultures, Hindu, Mohammedan, and British, unquote. This was both an explicit negation of any sectarian identification and an implicit celebration of the dignity of being broad-based rather than narrowly confined. That historic understanding was widely appreciated in Bengali literature and culture. Qari Nazrul Islam, who was undoubtedly the most successful Bengali poet after Tagore, immortalized some verses denouncing communalism that nearly all Bengalis knew well. Nazrul combined universalism with left-wing and very strongly left-wing political sympathies. A left-leaning literary magazine called L'Amour, or The Flower, which was established in 1925, carried Nazrul's poems on a regular basis. Nazrul in fact shared space in the first number of L'Amour with a biography of Karl Marx and a translation of Maxim Gorky's rebellious novel, Mother. L'Amour's chosen motto, which appeared regularly at the kind of a masthead of this left-wing magazine, was from the 5th century Bengali poet Chandidas. And it went, please hear me, my brother human being. Humanity is the highest truth we seek. There is no truth about that. The underlying idea was very much, of course, Nazrul's own. But the fact that in search of an articulation, those poetic lines could be picked up by Nazrul from a 500-year-old treasury of Bengali literature also tells us something about the nature of Bengali culture. Nehru's influence on Bengali thought was of course quite profound. His reputation as the Vidrohi Kavi, rebellious poet, had secured for him a very special place, and in many political contexts, even great fans of Tagore would look for the strong Assam tea of Nehru rather than the delicate flavor of Tagore's Darjeeling. There were very few Bengalis in my youthful days who could not recite without prompting and without text, looking at the text, Nehru's poem that goes by the name Kandari Hushiar, which can be freely translated as careful, the pilot of our boat. A particular admonition to the pilot warned them, I quote, "Is this drowning person a Hindu or a Muslim? Ask someone. Captain, tell him that the person is a human being, the child of my mother," unquote. The fact remains, however, that being a Bengali does not give any kind of immunity from organized use or communal divisiveness, or any guarantee of security against communal bloodshed. This is important to remember right now, when the recent advocacy of the politics of Hindutva is making, I understand, strong incursion into the social life of Bengal. It may not last forever, but serious dangers, I would say, certainly exist and can escalate rapidly. In the 1940s, the cultivation of communalism may have begun with rather mild advocacy of divisiveness, but violence and bloodshed found their way of spreading rapidly over the years that followed. In the new India of today, the promotion of flammable doctrines of the RSS and the Hindutva movement, with minorities under attack for alleged misbehavior, seen in a very sectarian perspective, for example, for wanting to punish the eating or storing of beef. Violence can erupt easily enough. With tension building in such neighboring states as Assam about the checking of a person's real citizenship and the temptation to use the religious card to lure people into more and more divisiveness in Bengal itself, the dangers of slipping into raw violence in communal life, whether or not mediated by the politics of the cow, can be very real indeed. The situation may demand that we see the implications of sectarian incitement as opposed to reasoned consideration of our political concerns, including the dangers of picking up a cause with superficial attraction that can hugely destabilize, at least for a period, the integrated politics of Bengal. The shared nature of identity may ultimately be very important in creating and sustaining an integrated and cooperative society. But it is not an insurance, and that's important to recognize. It's not an insurance, and it cannot protect us from the cultivation of dissonance and hatred. The force of Bengal's integrated tradition may ultimately overcome the violence that is generated by flammable sectarian rhetoric. But a lot of bloodshed and certainly a good deal of hatred may affect our lives before that correction occurs, which can be quite slow moving. along with the history of Hindu-Muslim cooperation, the joint cultivation of a good and integrated society. Bengal's history also includes the terrible violence of 1940s, there's no denying of that, short-lived as it may have been, followed, of course, ultimately by Patha Andalon and other uniting movements on both sides of the border, and now seems to be more threatened in West Bengal than it seems to be threatened in Bangladesh. The possibility of tragic violence does not, of course, remove the potential for a just and peaceful society that various ingredients of Bengali identity brings to us through hundreds of years of history. It may not be an insurance against calamities, and is not, but it continues to carry the resources for building a good society, once the demons of hatred and violence are subdued, but only then. The glowing picture of a constructive Bengali identity has tempted Bengalis for a very long time, for a good reason. As I approach the end of this talk, let me briefly recall an amusing, if I apologize, somewhat frivolous incident with a possible moral. This is from about 100 years ago, almost exactly 100 years ago. It concerns a real event reported, I fear, again by my grandfather, Amartya Sen, who told me about this, whose work on joint and cooperative activities of Hindus and Muslims I've used in this lecture before. The story draws on the common Bengali skepticism of priests and pretensions. The event occurred on an evening in the village of Sonaram in Vikrampur, when Kitty Sen's elder brother, Avani Mohan, was chatting with a close friend of his, a Muslim priest called Mahafizuddin, at the home of the latter of the Mahafizuddin home, while sharing a smoke from a hubble bubble together. While enjoying themselves, they saw a Hindu priest called Chakravarti going past, and Mahafizuddin invited him, who was a very courteous man, invited him warmly to join them for a smoke. "We are having a great time, please join us," said the Maulavi. Chakravarti declined and pointed to the difference between him, a spotless Brahmin priest, and his inviter, the Muslim Maulavi. "Remember," said Chakravarti, "I am a holy priest and you are not. We are altogether different." To this the Maulavi replied, "My friend, there is no real difference between us. You live by exploiting the vulnerabilities of poor, ignorant Hindus, and I live by exploiting the vulnerabilities of poor, ignorant Muslims. We are engaged in exactly the same business. Being a Bengali may not give us an insurance against calamity, and that is a warning particularly worth remembering at present difficult times. But it does encourage many attractive ideas, including sharing of some harmless amusement. I end, however, on a more serious note, on the search for a Bengali identity itself. About 1,000 years ago, in the 11th century, a Bengali poet traveling eastward on the river Padma or Padma tried to explain in a poem what he thought about being a Bengali. The poet was a Buddhist Buddhist Sahajiya thinker called Siddhacharya, or Siddhacharya if you like, or Siddhacharya. We don't quite know how they were pronounced in the Chojapot period, but I will use the present Bengali, Siddhacharya Busuku, speculating in one of his elegant Chojapot poems about his becoming a true Bengali. He expresses his sense of triumph in having been robbed of his wealth, good riddance, he thinks, during his river journey, and also in having married a woman from a very low caste, striking a blow for equity. As Siddhacharya Busuki puts it, I quote from him, I have steered the thunderbolt along the course of Padma. The pirates have robbed me of my misery. Busuki, today you have become a true Bengali, having taken a Chandal woman as your wife, unquote. A sense of detachment from property and caste seemed to be central to Busuki's idea of being a Bengali. There is a big influence, as you will readily see, of Buddhist thought here, and of course Chojapot, where Buddhist poems of the Sahajiya count. But that is generally true of early Bengal in many different ways. I should explain that there is an ambiguity here, because in those days, in the 11th century, Bengali or Bengali, as it was pronounced, I believe, at least spelled that way, often meant resident of a specific part of Bengal, in particular Dhaka and Faridpur, rather than people from anywhere in Bengal. In this reckoning, Rabindranath wasn't a Bengali where I was coming from Dhaka. So it depends on that, but there is clearly an attempt here to think about how a Bengali should consider living. He doesn't go into the distinction between Go and Ra and Vanga, which he could have, but he doesn't. He's concentrating on Vanga itself. There certainly is a vision here. There's something clearly important to seek. The equity and the neglect of property. That 1,000-year-old search has important and interesting implications for our time as well. I conclude there may well be, after all, some inspiration, but no insurance in being a Bengali. Thank you.
Thank you again, Professor Sen, for your wonderful lecture. I won't try to summarize the seamless weave that Professor Sen has made of the history of Bengal, the political history of Bengal from the time of Fahian to the current times, the history of Bengali literature from the Sahajiya poet down to Nazrul Islam and beyond. I'm sure Professor Sen would have referred to Shamsul Rahman and others, if he had time, to Rabindranath Tagore, and the history of the Bengali calendar, the semantics of the Bengali language, the syncretic culture of Bengal in many different forms, the geographical divisions between the Gaur, Ongo, Bongo, etc. And yet the identity of a Bengali remains in some ways diverse, in some ways variable with time and place, in some ways somebody who can recognize that his being a Bengali does not prevent him from being a Hindu, a Muslim, a Christian, a Jain, a Buddhist, a philosopher, a beggar, a carpenter, or anything like that. Professor Sen had been concerned, I believe, with the rise of identity politics for quite some time, and he has written a book on identity itself some years back, and I am very glad that he has now put his powerful analytical gaze on the question of what it means to being a Bengali. That is all I would say at the moment, and I'll leave the rest to the compared Professor Achin Chakraborty, who will invite the questions from the audience, as Professor Sen has said, but these questions must be written in a written form.
Yes, as Professor Bagchi mentioned, Professor Sen will take a few questions, few relevant questions. Of course, it must be related to what he has said today. Please write down the question clearly on a piece of paper. If you don't have a piece of paper, we can supply. Our colleagues are there. কেউ যদি বাংলায় প্রশ্ন করতে চান তাহলে বাংলায় লিখে প্রশ্ন করতে পারে।
That remain Bengali if culturally we stay divided. I think we can. Bengal has had many divisions in the past, and they still have survived and in attempt to get them together. Obviously, what the Bengali culture, to the extent you can identify it in a particular way that I was trying to outline, can be seen. We could say that when being divided isn't such a problem. Being divisive is a problem. Bengal has had Muslims and Christians and Buddhists and homophobes. That in itself doesn't prevent us from being good Bengali. But what could be is that if we decide to go at the throat of each other, there was in an earlier talk, I think in Jaipur, it wasn't part of my speech, but later on, I said that sometimes when Muslims are asked to repeat or celebrate loudly a Hindu victory cry, there's a problem there, particularly if a refusal means that you could be beaten, otherwise harmed, and sometimes killed. The issue wasn't so much whether that particular thing, whether Jai Shri Ram or anything else, is can be taught of Bengal. It's not very common in Bengal. But there's nothing Bengali is an open culture. There's nothing wrong in taking it. What would go against, as I understand the attempt at uniting Bengal, is the combining that with beating up people who don't, who are not with you, we are not in your line. And that we have avoided in the past, and I think it's, this is not an economics lecture, but I could talk a little about that since I am also an economist. The big thing that made partition so likely is is really Cornwallis and permanent settlement. You see, the Muslim kings hadn't taken a particular care to make it that the powerful men and potential landlords, and in fact real landlords, to be Muslim, they could be Hindus and Muslim. But when the East India Company was being established, and towards the end of the 18th century, when the permanent settlement was floated, there was an attempt to make these division between landlords and tenants very big and tyrannical of the tenants. Tapan was children, Tapan actually discussed it quite extensively. But that meant really that a huge part of Bengali population, in fact primarily Muslim population, were in way bad state in that respect. And one of the things that, one of the reasons, this is going entirely out of my subject here, my theme of the talk here, not my subject, why Fazlul Haq had such difficulty is because while he wanted to have a combined Bengal and he tried to join Saurabh and others in that respect, the Congress party was very reluctant to allow any kind of land reform. And that really meant that the whole political structure was really against the bulk of the Muslim peasants and tenants. Now, Fazlul Haq had his own problems. He was a friend of my family, a close friend of my father. So I won't go into it, but we all admired him. But we also see that there was he had temptations of various kinds, which may allow him to propose the Lahore Declaration one year, but also go in the opposite direction and read Rabindranath in the Bengal Assembly another year. But he had difficulty. Now, when Mujibur Rahman came, he was, of course, in my judgment, a much clearer, much sharper thinker in this respect and did not have these vacillations. But on top of that, by that time, after the partition, the Hindu landlords had all left. And so that there was a kind of land reform which made Sheikh Mujib staff somewhat easier than Fazlul Haq's have been. This doesn't deny the fact that Sheikh Mujib really had some qualities which were extraordinarily rare and which made him such a great man. But there was also an economic thing happening behind. I won't go into that, but division and divisiveness are serious issues to look at. Sorry, I'm always told by my children that I go on and on when I start speaking, so I mustn't. There was a question about whether religious coexistence is a distinguishing characteristic of Bengali. I don't think so. We have had religious coexistence in UP, in Gujarat, and elsewhere, and in the South. I don't think it is. On the other hand, there's something in the culture where religious coexistence got a lot of attention, and that's one of the reasons why I was giving this talk and talking about the various ways that we tended to look in the past, going back over 1,000 years to Chandidas and Chandi Mongol and Kadinalu and Ravindranath and many others. So it's not a distinguishing characteristic, but it has been an important part of at least one stream of Bengali culture. You have a lot of questions. Well, create minority identity. I think that there's a question about whether the construction of one identity to a majoritarian identity. Huh? Construction of one identity. Or whether it can become forget. Well, to some extent it has been, of course. Yeah, because you know, the beginning of any conquest had a lot of violence. People overlook at the end of Buddhism in Bengal and in India in general also had a lot of violence. Rabindranath has a play called Notice Bujan, where the place of violence is quite strong, in this case between Hindus and Buddhists, not between Hindus and Muslims. So the question is, can we build a kind of identity that goes against the majoritarian nastiness that we have seen? Well, I think that is what, of course, many people try to do when Rabindranath was arguing. That's why he sees himself in these very broad terms, like in the Evad lecture I quoted. It is because he thought that a uniting identity may do something to counter the divisiveness of the majoritarian identity. Now, what I was concerned with, and here there is no question that I ought to emphasize, and I did, I think, that I am quite afraid right now. I believe that there is not only no insurance in preventing violence, but and there is also some good likelihood that violence of a majoritarian kind will eventually be overcome, as it has been in Bangladesh, as it has been to some extent in West Bengal too. But it can overwhelm a population for a while. And right now, for various political reasons, partly connected with the odd politics of Bengal, of a ex-powerful party, the Communist Party, Marxist, suddenly disappearing and falling for various tactical concerns about how to deal with what they see as their principal, often in name with Trinamool, and Trinamool similarly taking a rather narrow view. But the fact is that there is a big division between those who see in a majoritarian Hindu way and those who don't. You should say that it's not ultimately very Bengali, maybe it isn't, but yet it can create havoc for a while, as we have seen in the 1940s, and we may not know for quite some time how far down the coal mine we have gone when these things happen. So I think, like many other people, I do think that reason is a solution to many of these problems, not not in the context of Bengal, but in fact elsewhere. One of the persons whose family I know from Santiniketan, namely Anand Patawatan, has a wonderfully interesting film called Reason. And why reason is really the most important way of countering violence and divisiveness that is so strong. And it's sad that the film has been difficult to show because of opposition from established authorities. But that is not different from the main message that Rabindranath, Subhash Chandra Bose, Mahatma Gandhi and others were presenting to India. So I agree with that, but we have to do something to deal with it. That is, no problem of this kind has an automatic solution. If there has to be a solution, we have to identify it by reason and try to pursue it with force and dedication and perhaps even some sacrifice, as indeed many people have done in the past and some people are doing right now in our country. So I can't leave it there. Question whether Bengali sub-nationalism can help to contain North Indian idea of nationalism. I don't want to be anti-North. And I can see what the thought there is. And of course, this has happened many times actually. There have been divisions. In fact, even dealing with Gandhiji's leadership and Subhash Chandra Bose Netaji's leadership, they were concerned of that particular kind. And similarly, Kerala's identification of itself, Bengal's identification, Tamil identification, all can play a part. But I think that may be too cunning to pursue. I think the big thing is that I've been trying to say that for some time in forums, wherever I get the forum, microphone, is that democracy is not a majoritarian enterprise. Winning an election is not a license to do what you like. This is very important when we deal with how the minorities are treated in this country. And to say that that's not democracy, that's something else, liberty or something, well, that is democracy. Democracy is about the voice that people have, as John Stuart Mill put it. Democracy is governed by discussion. And you cannot, it's not governed by only voting. Voting is a part of the discussion. But if there's no real discussion and people are kept separate, and if you excluded from some parts of the country on grounds that your presence is not welcome there, and there's no discussion of an independent kind about who is seeing what, then I think there is a violation of democracy that we ought to look at. So I think, I don't think that Bengal can claim to have a particular lead in democratic thinking But there have been a lot of democratic thinkers in Bengal, including, I think, Oshim mentioned Dirozio, and Dirozio in terms of his pluralism and wanting different points of view to be aired, did something in the cause of democracy, though he didn't call it that. So I would say that not so much subnationalism, but resisting the powerful and sometimes terrifying use of majoritarian power and confusing winning an election with having the license to do what you like with human beings' lives. That could cost a country and a culture enormously. We should avoid that. Getting to very difficult questions. What about the elite subaltern divide? I think there are two things here. There is no way of escaping some division between elite and subaltern. And to see that there is a presence of an elite immediately to damn the society makes a mistake, because I think leadership has often come from elite. I mean, when Qazi Nazrul Islam was writing for Lamo, when there is a biography of Karl Marx, and when there is a novel of Maxim Gorky, both Marx and Gorky are part of an elite, but they were trying to do some work using their elitist concern. And I do want to say this, that the absence of elite could cause a country a lot, cause a lot of problems. People don't recognize that when ultimately reform came in the Soviet Union with Gorbachev, Gorbachev was the first Soviet leader after Lenin who went to a university. So I think sometimes in a university and spend my life teaching, universities also have some use, and elitism is inescapably linked with that. I think the distinction is important for a very different reason. If elites prevent the movement of other people into position of power, stifle the free voice of others who can't speak, and ignore the voice of people because they're coming from non-elite parts of society, then that makes a difference. I think if there's anything very important for one of the things my grandfather was very involved with, namely Kabir, Dadu, and particularly Kabir, it is that you don't have to be a learned university don in order to have very important things to say that the world ought to listen. And so it's a way of understanding the role of the elite without that being stifling of every part of the society. And to just say we don't want any elite, even to say we just don't want any elitism, is really overlook something as to how widely our cultural sources are derived from. I mean, Oshim's example of Dirozio, I mean, you can't think of a more quintessential elitist character than him, who was also advocating that people should read Greek classics rather than religious texts. These are all part of a very complex society in which elites have a role, and not being an elite is not an exclusion. And the big things, I didn't get a chance to discuss that very much here, but the contributions, for example, of tribal, the Adivasis in Bengali culture has also been very strong. And I was speculating that in the elimination of gender, they may have a particular voice. It's possible, I haven't demonstrated it, but it could be. And so we have to look at influences coming both from Derozio and from Kabir, and not say one is in the league and the other is not, and therefore everything is fine. I think the real difficulty is the freedom of people. When you don't allow people to express their point of view strongly and effectively on grounds that they come from a subaltern level of the society, then you are actually committing a mistake. But that is quite different from a theory which concentrates entirely on subalterns versus elite, because that is not what we are really concerned with. We are concerned with the freedom of every human being and the ability to pursue that. And I may not have made the point clearly, but even when you're talking about a debate between an elitist Hindu Brahmin priest talking with a Maulavi in Sonarong in Vikrampur, there is standing up for people's voice, just as there is standing up for people's voice in the Sahodia Gautam poetry, which I also was quoting. These are complex subjects, but essential thing is the freedom of people to air their views, and freedom of people not to have either the majoritarian tyranny or have official colonial power or election-induced alleged dominance. I think any kind of dominance has to be resisted by looking at the sharing of what we as human beings all have a right to pursue and have a reason to want others to listen to us. So thank you. That was a moment. You don't know what kind of question it is. I thought the role of the left was to fight that. But when I was in school, and I did it down in some
Yeah, the question is, what would be the role of the left to counter the rising communalism in India?
There's such problematic terms, what is left and what is rising communalism and so on. But there are issues, goals, issues of strategies, and the goals of their issues of tactics. When the tactics become so dominant that the left doesn't stand against the rise of majoritarian sectarianism, I think I would say that the tactic has really overreached itself and made things really terrible for a country. So I think if the left is made tactical, I fear that there is a problem there. I think it's very important to understand what the understanding of the left role is. I was saying when I was young, I introduced Antonio Gramsci writing. I could see that there was a clear understanding as to what the role is of the left, which is not just of advocating a particular view of means of production and so on. It's much broader than that. Now, I happen to have some Italian connection. My late wife died tragically early from cancer. That was a left-wing family, and my father-in-law was actually killed by the fascists just before the war, just before the Americans were getting into Rome. But there was a big understanding that you have to fight these forces of divisiveness, and communalism is a kind of divisiveness. I think I would end with a story which I've used in my book, Identity and Violence. So some people may have read it, but I think it's appropriate for the issue here. Namely, the left is an understanding of what you stand for. I see myself as a part of the left, though sometimes when I see the dominance of tactics over strategy and ultimate goals, I have to say that worries me deeply and makes me think whether that identity of left is something that's attractive to me. But what is attractive would be understanding that there is a difference in the way a tyrannical group, whether they be fascist or Nazis, or upper class, Tories think of themselves compared with others. And if that distinction is not understood, I think the left would tend to lose in the battle. I think we need, and I quote Amartya Sen again, we need reason, we need courage on that. And the story I was going to say is that of a fascist recruiter who is trying to recruit in Italy in 1922 people to join the fascist party. The fascists were doing quite well. They were making the railway run on time. They were eliminating malaria, but of course they were tyrannical and fascist. And this is what the fascist recruiter telling a socialist villager, saying, you see, this is what the fascist party is doing, you should join us. And to which the socialist worker says, no, I can't join you because I'm a socialist, and I can't join the fascist party. And he said, well, you have to think for yourself. And he said, no, but you see, I'm a socialist. My father was a socialist. My grandfather was a socialist. I could not possibly join the fascist party. To which the fascist recruiter said, this is a very silly argument. What would you have done if your father was a murderer and your grandfather was a murderer? What would you have done then? To which the socialist worker said, well, in that case, of course, I joined the fascist party.
Data from Union?